Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Times Talks at Cinema Cafe. Unfortunately, my Sundance colleague John is stuck in a snowstorm, so I'll be making the introduction for both the New York Times and Sundance tonight. So Times Talks is thrilled to be collaborating once again with Cinema Cafe on a series of Times Talks over the next few days. Today, our guests need no real introduction, but we have Gus Van Sant, the award-winning director, screenwriter, artist, and author, whose film, Don't Worry, He Won't Get Far on Foot, is in the festival and will be joined this afternoon by composer, singer, and songwriter Danny Elfman, who wrote the score for the film. And moderating this afternoon's conversation is one of our favorite New York Times contributing writers, Logan Hill. So thank you so much for coming.
Thanks. And at first, I'll just tell you a little bit about the run of show today, because we're going to do something a little unusual, which is great, and I think really special for everybody who's here. It'll be a little weird if you're watching on the live stream, because the screen is going to black out at a few seconds for you guys, so apologies for that. But for everybody here...
No social media.
The no social media code is because we're going to have some exclusive footage from the film which premiered last night, and we're going to have some exclusive audio of the score. Sometimes here we get into lots of big ideas. We're going to get pretty specific today and really talk about a couple of scenes and how these two guys who've worked together on so many films work together on their latest. Just as a reminder, Promised Land, Restless, Milk, Good Will Hunting, and one of my favorite films in the world, To Die For, are just some of the films. Is that all of them? Am I missing Psycho? I'm missing Psycho.
Promised Land?
I got Promised Land. But I thought because you guys have been collaborating for so long, I'm interested in that process. Being at the heights of your fields, how that negotiation works, how those discussions work on films. And I thought we might start with To Die For. What was it like, those first negotiations and getting to know each other?
Well, it was through my girlfriend at the time knew Gus, and you contacted her. And she came to me and said, would you be interested in meeting Gus Van Sant? I was like, sure. So she kind of middleman, didn't she?
Yeah, I think we had a friend in common, Carolyn Thompson. And so I was assuming that Danny Elfman was out of reach for my filmmaking style. And then I found out through Carolyn that he was actually really interested. So we concocted the To Die For project.
Yeah. How did you feel each other out? I mean, how did you know that you were on the same page and were going to work well together? Or did you not know? Is it always a gamble?
Yeah, we didn't know.
Yeah.
That's I think about the business, I think, is like you never really know.
No, especially with music, you don't know until somebody's right in the middle of actually doing it and you're listening to stuff, because you don't get a treatment version. If you're doing a writer, you might get a treatment of a story and then you flesh it out to a full script. With the music, you're going on trust until the person's hired on the project writing music and you hear it, and then if you hate it, you got a problem. But at that point, early on with To Die For, you didn't really see being involved to the level as you became later because of your previous experiences where you were more removed.
I think I just hadn't had an experience, a more traditional scoring experience. Or also Danny's style was to basically, make sure that what he was working on was something that I was, as well let in on and listening to. So I think the first thing that we did was Danny chose a couple of scenes and made a few different versions of ideas that he had that he wanted to carefully walk me through each version and show me which version of the cue, what was different about them, because sometimes they were similar, sometimes they were very different, but I was part of it, and I remember saying, why don't you just take the movie, make the score, and I'll see you on the mixing stage.
Yeah, it was like old school, Alfred Hitchcock would have done with Bernard Herrmann. It's like, okay, do your score, I'll see you on the other side.
They would do that in the old days?
Yeah. That's all movies were made really back then. They didn't have demos, they didn't do demos. So Hitchcock never got to hear his scores until it was with the orchestras in the studio.
Whoa.
Yeah. And so Gus was approaching
So
a
that's what I
little
was
bit
talk-
old school.
That's what I was talking about.
And I was more from the school of, the directors involved with every decision. And also because my style of writing is to look at a scene and come up with a number of options. I mean, unless it's real obvious, like it's a superhero and it's a villain's theme or something like, it's okay. I think everybody knows it's going to be this kind of thing. But in a movie like To Die For, certainly in all the early Tim Burton films, there was nothing obvious that should go in any scene, ever. It could be anything. So you look at stuff and you go, well, we can play it this way, or we can play it this way. And then here's a crazy thing we could do. So I usually start with a couple of things that seem like could be this or this, and then one, like, on the other hand, here's way from left field. And then let the director get pulled into it. And To Die For, in particular, there's so many ways to go. It was almost like an unlimited ways to approach it. There was no obvious way to approach To Die For.
There was a desire to mix heavy metal, which the kids would be listening to, with a more traditional orchestra, which would be the voice of the filmmakers, I guess.
Yeah, and we did have a conversation about a band called Nail Bomb. So Gus played me some of this speed metal, and he said, I'd like this somehow to be incorporated. So I kind of pulled that into the actual score, because I was listening to Nail Bomb and really digging it, and going, okay, and I could do this, and start having fun with that. So there was like this bit of a jumping off place of like, in Good Will Hunting, it was like the other opposite. It was Elliott Smith's guitar, and Gus knew up front that I want to use Elliott Smith. So there it was like, okay, I actually had these songs to listen to interface with, but those songs were actually going to be in the movie. Whereas with Nail Bomb, it was more just like the idea of Nail Bomb. It wasn't for sure any specific song was going to be in a certain, maybe there was one scene.
There's one cue when they see Nicole's character walk by them at school.
Okay, so there was that. So I knew that there was that one piece in there. So that did give me something to hang on a little bit.
And there's a little bit of a myth around this one. I was mentioning this earlier, that the film screens for the first test screenings with no score, and the story is so unusual, the tone of the movie is so hard to predict, that it doesn't go terribly well until the score is added and the can premiere happens. You want to talk a little bit about like sort of how much the score means to sort of setting expectations for the tone of that movie?
I always thought that the score was just rigged in a very bad way. I didn't really think of the music as the cure for our ills. It was more that the studio seemed to be testing it as a romantic comedy, and that they weren't told. My story always is at. We had a test. It scored 32, which is very low. We had another test planned after editing a little bit. My editor was so sure that the tests were being mishandled that he went to be indoctrinated. And he sort of cruised around South Pasadena where the film was going to be testing, and found the people with white coats and free tickets to this test screening. And he got to ask them questions like, oh, what's this? Pretending he was a dentist and his wife was with him. And they said, it's a movie you can, see for free. And they said, what's it about? And they looked at their chart and said, oh, it's a romantic comedy. So who's in it? Nicole Kidman and Matt Dillon. And they said, who directed it? And they were like, looked through their pages and said, we don't know. And like, what's it about? We don't know. It's just a romantic comedy. So I think that the people that went to see it were thinking of a romantic evening, and it was about a woman who kills her husband. And so they probably didn't get laid, or weren't gonna get laid. So that's when asked, like, how do you rate this film? They're like, very, very poor on the box. So that was my story.
I mean, generally, because I've been through close to 100 previews. I've done over 100 films now. And the more quirky the film, the harder it is to preview. And that's also where the music makes the biggest difference. The odder the film, the more the music can lead you into how you're supposed to be feeling. In other words, it was very intentional in the beginning of To Die For. We wanted something really aggressive and kind of crazy to kind of say, this is the kind of film you're going to be getting in to see. This is not a romantic comedy. I mean, it was very much like when I had Beetlejuice before, which also tested horribly, so horribly the movie almost got dropped. And they had in their temp kind of long flying, gliding music over the beginning. And I said, let's do something that won't happen until 45 minutes in the movie. Let's put that right in the title up front. So you know, right in the beginning, oh, I get it. It's going to be like that. I may have to wait for that, but that's going to happen, that kind of craziness. So the odder the film, tone-wise, the more you can do with the music to get people locked into, oh, I get it. This is going to be fun, or this is going to be crazy, or, you know, and in To Die For, like Beetlejuice, making a statement right out the top help pull people into, oh, okay, get my mind set into, it's going to be kind of dark and fun.
Now that you two have worked together for decades, I'm curious, is that template that you set in To Die For, where you score to a couple of scenes, give different versions, is that the way you've continued to work together, or is it different depending on the film?
It's pretty close. I mean, it's actually close to the way I work on every film, is to start out with a lot of ideas. And I like to put the director as if they're in an optometrist's chair, getting an eye exam. And so you can go, A or B? Okay, now B. Number 1 or number 2? and you try to like hone in the score from way out here to like something more focused like that. So that's kind of how I imagine myself in the beginning.
And that presumes that the director, you're really following the director's guidance. Is there a point there where you say, no, really, think about number 1? I know you like number 2. You think number 2 looks better, but number 1, you give number 1 another shot.
For me?
Yeah, for you.
No, I'm indecisive about everything. Famously, Gus and I are kind of similar in this. When we were doing Good Will Hunting, Gus's young assistant, Scott and Hattie or Maddie? Hattie, Scott and Hattie, they'd be sitting on the floor behind us. He'd be in my studio in Topanga Canyon. And they'd just be like sitting, kind of hanging out, talking. And just about every cue, I'd play like one version and then the other, and Gus would go, I'm not sure, what do you think? And I go, I don't know, I can think of just as many reasons why this works as this works. And you start like getting logical about it. You go, well, on the one hand, but on the other hand. And we both get that way. And we turn to Scott and Hattie, go, what do you guys think? And they go, oh, number 1. I go, they both say the same number every time. And all of those choices made it in the movie. Because later, we were sitting there on Milk, and we were going, oh, where's Scott and Hattie?
Well, I wanted to ask you about Milk, because I'm always really interested in those creative decisions people make that then they abandon, where they change course. They get in pretty deep, but do change course. And it sounds like that's a soundtrack where you decided, we've been working quite a long time on one approach, and it's just not, not going to be in the film.
Only once, Milk. The first thought was opera. Because he listened to opera, and I started writing an operatic score, and I wrote about 12, 14 minutes, and Gus was in his first playthrough, remember? It was in Malibu that time, and you were out there, and his face is not the usual kind of like, yeah, it's more worried. And then he goes, I don't think this approach is working.
And the idea was that opera sort of reflected Harvey Milk's interest in opera,
right.
So it made sense in terms of the character.
Yeah.
Well, it's not uncommon that what one thinks makes sense musically, because I've had this.
I think also like at that moment in Malibu, I remember I wanted to make it more weird.
Yeah.
And I was saying, why can't you do like just a Tim Burton score?
Well, what happened there was one short cue that was only about 30 seconds long that I'd done for some other little scene. He said, that one, play that one again. And he said, move that over the titles, move that over here. And then he said, I think that's a better direction. And this little cue became now the template for the whole score.
Oh, yeah. Oh, when we were using something that was very experimental, which was my chance to get something more weird, which was the beginning cue in the titles.
Right.
What do you call that?
I don't even know.
It's where Danny has some time left over in the recording session with an expensive orchestra. And
I do weird shit.
A lot of times in England, but you don't want to not use the time because you're paying for 10 extra minutes. You finished early. So Danny gets up on the podium.
It's like improvising sounds.
And what do you tell them?
I'll tell them perhaps, in this particular case, okay, we're just going to start on a C, but now when we start, I'm going to want half of you to go up, half of you to go down, and half of you to do something else when I signal you. And then I want you all to start moving harmonics, overtones, in a tempo that I'm going to give you. And I said, interpret that any way you like. And
So-
then the musicians start just doing this.
But some of the musicians, they just put their batons down and go like this. Like, I'm not doing it. This is not what they play notes, they don't improvise.
Yeah, but a lot of them really
Then
got
the
into it.
others do
And
it.
out of that came some sounds. And there was a sound that Gus really liked. He goes, I don't know what that is, but we should make that part of the score. So, but the point is that we started with opera as a concept. And sometimes you do start with let's try this, and it just doesn't work. And we literally started from scratch, and none of the operatic or early part of the score made it in the movie.
And just logistically, I'm curious, at what point do you become involved in a Gus Van Sant film? Is there a rough assembly? Are you looking at scripts? How soon do you start thinking about the music?
Well, I don't really start thinking about it until there's a rough assembly. Because he'll send me scripts, but I find if I start thinking in the script, it usually leads me astray. Because I'm imagining a movie, and the movie I see is never the movie that's in my head. And how he directs has a lot to do with what kind of score. If he's directing quickly with cuts, or if he's doing slow, and the performances that he's getting, and the cinematography, and is it real lighting, or is it more moody lighting? All of these things are going to indicate a different kind of music. So what he does with it, when there's a rough cut, I don't need a whole cut, but I can see tonally, oh, okay, I'm getting the feel of it. I could feel it, and it's in that feeling that I'll get the music. So when I'm reading the script, I try to actually keep myself from thinking too much about it, because I've gotten misled a number of times. I'm imagining a thing in my head, and I actually see the movie and go, it's very different. And it could be as simple as the performance is way different than what I was imagining. Or, like I said, the cinematography, lighting, editing, all of these things give it a feel. And you score differently. I don't know how to explain it. The more theatrically you shoot, as opposed to, what is the word when you're keeping it really real? Lighting, natural, and
Just real.
real. Okay. It's going to be very different kind of music. The more real you get with the music, you're going to tend to want to get more simplistic and minimal with the music. And then as it gets more theatrical or montage-like, you're going to open the music up. Perhaps more.
So let's get real specific about this. We've got a treat for you. We've got some original score from Don't Worry, He Won't Get Far on Foot. And I assume most of you weren't able to get into see the film yet, so you'll see it soon. It's about John Callahan, who's kind of a local hero in Portland. He's sort of famous for these very darkly comedic cartoons. He was an alcoholic who, after a terrible drunk driving accident, ends up in a wheelchair for the rest of his life. Film stars Joaquin Phoenix, so you'll be seeing him. Jonah Hill, and everyone will be saying, as you've never seen him before. I think I've already heard that from 10 people. As his AA sponsor. Cast is rounded out with Rooney Mara, Carrie Brownstein, Beth Ditto, really fantastic cast. And it's just as John Callahan kind of has an odd tone to his personality, the film takes that on. So I don't know if you would like to set up what we're going to hear now, or if we should just play it. What do you think?
Yeah, we could set it up. I mean, it's the which one is it?
The first one will be Out of Reach.
Out of Reach. So this is a kind of turning point in our character's history as an alcoholic, and it's mostly Joaquin's scene, I think, and it's because it was a turning point. I had tried all kinds of different things in the temp score. I think I was going at sometimes for Lawrence of Arabia, the desert walk, where the strings were sort of indicating like his dehydration and the sun.
The temp score.
Sometimes, yeah.
Do
Sometimes
you ever
Dan-
do you normally share a temp score, or do you just keep that aside?
Sometimes you will, and sometimes you won't.
If I go to a preview, then I have no choice, because the preview is going to have a temp score. Oh, if I go to a preview, sometimes I'll go to a preview before I've started, and then I'm going to hear the temp score. But that's the only time I'm ever going to hear the temp score, is if I go to a preview.
So this one, I guess you hadn't heard, but I tried a lot of different things, and I think they worked for a while and then they kind of fell apart.
I
Like,
just remember Paco Bell.
okay, oh, Pachelbel was more
Beginning.
for the whole movie, yeah. Canon in D, but this is something we wanted
That's a really good example of how something really changes from beginning to end. Because in the beginning, there was a point where you said maybe we should even do like variations on Pachelbel's canon.
Right.
And I actually thought about that. And what we ended up with is so not that. It's crazy. But we took this kind of, like with Milk, kind of start here, and then we end up, and by the end, he's going, oh, try something stranger, get something crazier. And then he takes the cues I do and he mixes them up. He likes to really play with it, which I'm fine with Gus, because he's good at that. But
Well, I guess so. We're gonna play the audio.
We were just going to play the audio first by itself, and then play the audio with the scene.
So we'll do back to back right now.
This is a mix that's for the album, so it will I mean, the cool thing is, like, you won't hear it the same way when you see it with the.
yeah, we've never done this. I've never done this before. This is the first time ever. This Gus, let's try this. So it's weird. I'm hearing my music.
But
There's no
it's a
scene.
scene
You
where,
don't know what the movie is. It's
The scene where our character has been basically he's a quadriplegic. He's basically been locked in the house, and his daily allotment of alcohol, the bottle has fallen under the couch, so he can't get it. So I don't think that's in the scene, but that's the setup.
So we'll play that clip.
It's really weird doing it this way.
Well, I'm curious. I was thinking one way to talk about this might be something I've heard you say in interviews before. That some people talk about scoring a scene, scoring a chase, a plot. They talk about plot in terms of score. And I've often heard you talk about scoring to character. That you're thinking of character more than event. Is that a way of talking about this scene and this moment in his journey?
I don't actually know. For this type of movie, I'm not going to write a thematic character theme or something like that. There are some themes that repeat in the movie, but it's not like his theme. But I don't really think about that other than, I'm just looking at the scene and kind of experimenting with sounds. And I have a very limited group to play with, which was kind of the fun part on the score. I only had like a budget for 8 musicians, I think. And obviously I'm used to like getting 100 and something or whatever I want. So, but this was like, you have enough budget, you have enough for 8. So it's like, all right, I'm gonna write a piece for no more than 8 people. So, and it's kind of a coincidence. The voice that happens in the movie is the sister of Jack Black's wife, Petra Hayden, and she's doing like kind of odd vocal things, and I used a stand-up bass to do a lot of sounds that we ended up liking. Like with Milk, it was this weird orchestra sound, but here it was the sound of a bass. I'm using a lot, just making odd sounds. And that was part of the messing around experiment part.
So Gus, when you were looking at different versions of this, or thinking what you wanted out of the scene score-wise, how did that evolve, or were there earlier versions of this that you weren't as wild about?
From Danny? I don't remember.
Not on this scene.
Yeah, I think that it probably evolved. There was a scratch track, which was this same piece, but it was done with sampled instruments. So it sounded like this, but when you finally record it, it's quite full compared to the scratch track. So there was that. But it probably was just, we altered the scene. We added the kind of like panels that fall down.
Right. The scene changed.
At some point. So you altered the score.
Did that
Which happens a
change
lot. The changes, originally the piece was longer, and then it got shorter, and then the kind of montage part in the middle.
And there are themes, I think, there are certain themes that repeat that are about like an evolution of his cartooning, or a good.
There's connectivity.
Yeah.
Which any good score, if it doesn't have like a character theme, but there's still connectivity. So his cartooning in the middle of the film connects to him at the end of the film,
Right.
and things do connect, which I feel real strongly about. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of different pieces of music if you don't connect anything.
Gus, I was wondering, this is a film in some ways about a man's recovery, going through the 12-step process, and he's a very smart guy. He's very self-aware of the cliches and the like stereotypes around all this kind of therapeutic language. He's resistant to it, and I think he says at some point, "Oh, this is like my epiphany. This is the moment where I'm supposed to have the breakthrough." And in film language, I think, oh, that's the peak. There's going to be this big emotional peak, and it's going to break, and he's going to be a changed man. In the film, it's clear that there's not one moment. Does that change the way you're building the film in terms of working with score?
Yeah, I mean, I think it changed, and it was a way that it changed in the shooting of the film, because in his story, in John Callahan's original story and the book, this is leading up to like an epiphany. This is the beginning, and then there's a scene right after this where there is an epiphany that he has. We didn't bring that one down, do we? Maybe. Anyway, it was very much a centerpiece of his life. He had this like sort of out-of-body experience that did, in his interpretation in his book, make him stop drinking like just on that moment, on the spot, and his attendant's about to come in and say, "Where's Snickers the rat?" Or the mouse, and he announces that he's had this epiphany.
It's really right after the scene.
It's right after the scene.
Saw.
So there is in the story there was this, in John's life there was this huge epiphany, And that became only one. You're right. It's like less than one. Like there's multiple epiphanies in the movie, which I guess was just the way it turned out.
Well, the character says, I mean, he says, I was expecting this would happen, and I'd cry, and I'd be totally changed, but I'm still here.
Right.
And his mentor,
Donnie,
says it's not like that. You're still going to be the same person, and you still have to carry this stuff through your whole life. So that is kind of built in part of the whole story. It's not like this one moment, and he feels completely changed. It's a series of things.
And the epiphany itself is basically just that, you know, he was living as a quadriplegic and drinking all day, every day. And, you know, the epiphany was that his problem wasn't his quadriplegia, but his drinking. It wasn't like the chair, it was like the bottle.
We're going to get to some questions. Should we maybe for the next clip just do the video part? I think I've run a little bit over. Okay,
Sure.
so we have one more clip and we'll talk about the score in this clip. So we have we'll cue up the next clip, which is the car crash.
I mean, one thing I can say about the evolution of Gus and I is each film from To Die For to now, he's gotten much more confident with wanting me to try other kinds of stuff. When we first started, he was very shy. You know, you might say, maybe you should try this or that. And then later is like, okay, that's fine, but like, let's find something completely different from another location and try it. He really likes to mix things up. And now he's more confident. He'll say, do you mind if we take all the cues you wrote and like put them in completely different places? No, he wouldn't have done that, you know, earlier on. But I'm fine with it because it actually sometimes makes it more interesting even than what I wrote. But he's definitely got more confident with wanting to experiment. Sometimes we get into like a little argument over it. He challenged me. We got into a thing over a composition he heard in the car on the way over to my studio about a composer had written something based on the Higgs boson, the math of a Higgs boson. And I told him that's bullshit. You know, there's no math of Higgs boson in this thing. It's just a piece of music. And we started arguing about it, and I did an improvisation based on what I insisted was the mathematics of a singularity in a black hole, which I had memorized and knew completely. And we finished this crazy improv, and it was actually kind of good. And he's like, can we use this? And I'm like, no. In another film, no, why can't we use it? Because we were doing Promised Land. And I was saying, I just don't see how we use this in this movie. I said, it needs a crazy, some kind of scene montage or something, a dream sequence or something. And so we kind of went up and back a little bit about that. And but he's so bold, he'll take anything and put it in there. He's more courageous than I am. I tend to be a little more cautious of like, well, I don't want to wreck the tone of the film for the audience either. So part of me is like, yeah, okay, let's do this. Let's go for it. And part of me is like looking at from the overview of like, at what point am I going to tip the audience way off the rail and then feel like, oh, I kind of like threw them into a place, but not at a moment where because that happens to me when I'm watching films. Sometimes I'll hear a piece of music and it like throws me completely out of the film, and I get really bothered by that. So I keep that in mind, but that's not to say that I'm right. It's just I'm maybe a few degrees more cautious than you are. Would you agree?
Yeah, no, I think you're a safety net probably for me.
Because, but on the other hand, he pushes me to try stuff that I wouldn't. So there's definitely a balance. Like I'll go to this place and Gus will say, no, do something else there, do something, and I like that, So I like being pushed, and then occasionally I'll go, whoa, let's just be cautious here. I try to be that voice of.
Well, I know a lot of you have questions you'd like to ask. You get bonus points today if you have a question about one of the clips we just watched, because I feel like I want to talk about them more. But we'll pass around a microphone. Please raise your hand if you got a question, and we'll get one to you. Standing up in the back.
Hi, for Danny, I was curious, as a composer, the one thing I was hearing is that composers don't really like when directors give them temp tracks for like inspiration or to copy from or anything like that. So I was just curious, as a inspiring director myself, when would that be appropriate, if ever?
Well, I mean, sometimes it's helpful if I'd like to, in the best of all worlds, I never hear the temp. And it's becoming more and more impossible to do that because, in the early days, there wasn't the demanding rigorous previews that we have now. To Die For was pretty late in the process. But now...
To Die For is also a period where, that we didn't have computers. It was hard to mix stuff together. It was hard to put music in. So it's either like music or no music.
But there are times when the director... I'm playing something, and he goes, no, there's a feel of something. And I go, well, let's listen to the temp. What is it that you're responding to? And I can listen to it and go, oh, I see. You're really hearing this tempo, and that's moving you, and then I'll have to pay attention to that. There's a tempo or something, and I go, yeah, I could see that. Why you would, I'm writing something much slower. You're feeling something more aggressive, or with an ostinato, with a repeating pattern. And so there is times when it's useful, but for me, it's like 85% damaging, harmful, and 15% useful, because half of my job, not with Gus, but with other directors, is getting them off of their temp is really half the job. Writing the score is only half of it. Like going through the slow process of peeling them away from what they've been hearing for 6 months is incredibly difficult, and I feel sorry for them because they've been hearing it, or on an animated feature, they could have been hearing it for over a year. And I'd hate to be in that position where I've been hearing something for a long time and then suddenly I'm not. Gus, he's more the anomaly. He doesn't get attached to stuff. So I don't ever remember a time we said, listen to this temp, I really love what it's doing. Can you do something like that? Because I've been through that many times, but that's one of the reasons I love working with Gus. He doesn't seem to get real attached to the temp scores.
Try another question? Over here? We'll get you a mic first. Hold on a second.
Is that true? What I just said? Or am I making that up?
Well, I don't get attached because you, I think, make it clear that you don't want to hear the temps.
See how I changed the narrative to kind of fit my own point of view? That has probably to do with a lot of my memories.
I agree
in
with the
general.
concept of it's going to be better if you don't if you are influenced by the temp score. I find that a good idea, you know.
You had a question?
So, using that clip actually as a jumping point, and there's questions for Gus. I think Danny touched on really nicely on the evolution of you as a filmmaker, working with you over the years. So kind of based on that clip, what are ways in which Danny's evolved for you, and how does he continue to surprise you?
How Danny has evolved?
Yeah, as a collaborator, he kind of spoke a bit about, you started off maybe a bit more shy, have grown in confidence. What are ways in which approaching a conversation with him now when you make a film, maybe that he continues to...
I think one of the things that happens, I think, is, and between, even on To Die For, when we first spoke about the score for To Die For, it was really an attempt session. You wanted to know, Danny didn't want to hear the temp necessarily, but he wanted to know where it starts and where it ends. Which,
it was a spotting session.
yeah.
And
Which
you've
is,
never done a spotting session.
yeah, I'd never really done that. I thought maybe the composer just decided where the music would go.
Yeah,
But
I'm used to a thing called a spotting session, where you sit with the editor and you go through every cue and you talk about music should start here, it should play through here, and it should kind of come out here.
Right.
And then we give it a name and a number. It gets like 1M1, 1M2, 1M3, and there's like the list that comes from the spotting session. Gus
Right.
was like, I don't do that.
And my editor, Curtis Clayton, was quite used to that. I think one of the things that had happened before To Die For, My Own Private Idaho, I decided to just do the score myself, in the sense that I used public domain songs like America the Beautiful or the national anthem, and or Home on the Range. These were things that were in public domain, and had musicians come in a recording studio and play to the picture. There was a spotting, it was like start here, end there. And this infuriated my editor. He said, "This is not the way, what are you doing? This is not the way you do it." But I had something very clear in my head, that would work, and we brought in a pedal steel and a musical saw and all this stuff, and it became fine. So I had done it, that way. Elliot Goldenthal had done Drugstore Cowboy. He had done that just sort of in his New York apartment and just sent us the score. So I sort of had a rudimentary understanding by To Die For of how it worked. But then the spotting session was kind of new for me, literally, because
Because that was more of a formal thing, and with an actual list and a breakdown, and that's just because that's where I had been brought up to do. So, but on the other hand, I would love to do something the way Gus is describing. We just go in the studio with musicians
and
with
you
some
just
vague themes.
start winging it, basically.
I've only done that once my whole life. It was a movie called Freeway. And I had 3, 4 guys, sketched out a few ideas, had nothing written down, really, and we just winged it like you're describing. It was really
cool.
fun.
Another question? Right over here. We'll get you a mic. Hold on a second.
We should do that sometime.
I think we've got just about 5 minutes left.
Thank you. This one's for Danny. I was interested recently by the decision to bring back the classic John Williams score in your previous score in the Justice League movie, and I was wondering, based on that, how you decide to write these character themes, whether it is based on the fundamentals of a character, based on the interpretation specific to that movie.
Well, it's just a totally different medium. When you're writing for a Milk or Don't Worry, You Won't Get Far on Foot or To Die For, you're not writing character themes. You're writing tonal themes that follow the story, as Gus is describing. We're connecting, here's 3 moments, and we want to connect those 3 moments. Whereas in a superhero genre, you're literally giving a theme to each character. Batman has a theme, Superman has a theme. I just loved the Superman theme, so I begged to bring back John Williams. I convinced them at DC that they've got this incredible wealth, they've got these gems, they should use them, they should be proud of them. And but it's just very different. That in that genre, everybody gets a theme. And so that was kind of defined by Star Wars, which goes back to Korngold before Star Wars back to the 40s and 50s, where you've got the good guy theme, you've got the bad guy theme, you've got the love theme, you've got every theme is really cleanly defined. That's classic film scoring circa 1940s, 50s from the golden era, and most superhero films still essentially follow that template of, your evil guy is going to have your evil theme. Your Darth Vader walks in, he's got a Darth Vader theme. Whereas in a drama, that gets really corny really fast. And so my feel for writing themes at all, like, I'm really fond of the milk theme, what I call the milk theme, you might not even hear as the theme to milk. It's what I call the milk theme, but it's not necessarily Harvey Milk's theme. It's just a theme that I feel plays the heart, the feeling of the movie. So it's not connected to any character, it's just the feeling of Harvey that, and we used it 3-4 times so it connects elements, it ends the movie with it. And so it's thematic, but it's not like Harvey walks on screen and Harvey's theme plays. It's just more about wanting to get a feeling that connects, carries through.
I think about time for one last question. Over here, we'll get you a microphone.
Probably go 5 more minutes.
Okay. Try to do 2.
Hi. This question is for Gus. Sorry for my English, but every time I have the same question when I watch your movies. In my opinion, the music is really strong and the acting is really strong. So I used to wonder if the actor follow the music or the music follow the acting. So I was wondering if in rehearsal process, the actor have the opportunity to listen to music to get some influence for the color and the rhythm to choose the way to act.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think so. I have never actually had music before during the shooting that I would play any of the characters. I don't think. I know in the only movie that I had something in mind was Good Will Hunting, because it was set in Harvard, and it had a feeling of something that I had seen other movies do, where like they take a musician and they play a number of his pieces, in particular, I guess The Graduate, and Simon and Garfunkel. Elliott Smith to me sounded like Simon and Garfunkel, although I was told when I met Elliott, don't mention Simon and Garfunkel. But there was sort of something to it, and I was into that. I'm sure I didn't play the actors that score. I gave that Elliott's music to the editor. In the original screenplay, it indicated that the score was world music, that it was going around different types of music from around the world as part of its score, and we tried that, and the editor was trying that, and I just said like scrap it, like use Elliott. That's the closest I came. I think other filmmakers sometimes actually create a score. Have you ever worked that way, Danny?
Well, I've never done a score that was played for the actors, because by the time I'm on a film, the actors are generally gone. Just to answer your question, usually by the time I start, the actors are already off on another film, and I'm lucky to even meet them. But there is moments where directors will play something specific for an actor. Yeah. I mean, historically, the most famous would be Sergio Leone. Sergio Leone, he would get the music in advance, and he would play it on the set as if it were an opera. But these are very operatic pieces, and he needed an operatic piece built, and then he would work around it. Directors like Kubrick would build entire scenes around a piece of music, but he would find a pre-existing piece of music that was already recorded. And I've often called The Shining a perfectly scored film, and there's no original music at all. But he would take a piece of music that he loved, and he would start cutting minutes before where the climax of the piece of music is getting to, and build it right up to the tennis ball hitting the wall. Perfectly scored, but he did that to the music. So the actors weren't hearing it, but he had it in his head, I'm going to use this. But that's kind of rare.
Yeah.
And I'm getting into history now.
And I think sometimes the actors will have music that they like, that they play when they're, rehearsing their own pieces or learning their lines. So they independently have something that they're playing for themselves that I never end up hearing unless they give me the.
And I never end up hearing. But that.
So it's separated.
their
There is
personal
music
thing.
around, but it's not necessarily the music that ends up in the movie. Although when we did Jerry, which was a film I brought to Sundance, the music that was in that movie, and particularly Arvo Part, was music that we were playing when we were driving across Argentina on the way to a desert where we were shooting the first part of the movie with Casey Affleck and Matt Damon and myself in the car that they drove. We were just decided to do this road trip as a way to get across the country. And we were playing, Casey had the CDs with him and he was playing Arvo Part and a few other, some folk musicians that weren't in the score, but Arvo stood out. It started to become like the sound of our adventure and the sound of the movie.
But
So
it's like the Kubrick thing. So
Yeah.
the piece of music actually indicated how you were going to put the sequence together because you had that already in your head, and like Stanley would.
yeah. And then when I used it in the edit, it just worked perfectly, partly because the whole thing had revolved around these records that we were playing when we were making the movie.
Everybody, I'm going to ask you to stay in your seats for just a second. These guys have got to get going really quickly, and they're going to head out the doors. If you mind just staying
We
here.
have one last question.
Yeah, we'll do one.
One last question.
He's
Then we're gonna both end.
demanding one last question. We'll do it here on the aisle right here. We'll get her a
I'm
mic.
sorry, I love question answers. It's my favorite part.
Thank you. My question is for Gus about the car crash scene in your movie. It was a really amazing and interesting choice not to show the accident. It really kept us focused on the character's experience opposed to relating our own experience to a car crash. So I'm wondering how that came about. Was it written that way? Did you already have it in your head? Was it a budget saver because you didn't have to have an accident? Just kind of curious how you got there.
There was an image that followed a cartoon that you could see the aftermath of the car crash in the film. So you saw the aftermath and you saw beforehand, and we did continue the shot all the way up until the crash, and we made a crash with special effects. We had fire and we had a pole and so forth that it ran into, and somehow before we finished the edit, we realized that we didn't need to finish that special effect because it was better to not see it because it was so, yeah.
Which is also musically how we approached it. It's like not to give anything in the music that says we're about to crash. It's actually very calm. And to me, watching that the first time, what I loved about it, I was really happy they didn't show the crashes. It becomes his experience. If you've ever been in a catastrophic thing, you don't remember the catastrophic thing. You remember falling asleep, and then next thing you know, you're in the hospital. And that's exactly how it feels, which I thought was beautiful. That there's no big moment. It's just, and it happened. It changed my life forever. I love that. It's one of my favorite moments in the movie.
Thank you two so much.
Good, thanks.
We really appreciate you coming. And if everyone could just stay in your seats for just a little bit. Thank you very much.